Up next in the broadcast, after standing his ground for weeks, Prime Minister nominee Moon Chang-keuk steps down but defends his right to freedom of religion and says his alleged pro-Japanese comments were presented out of context by the media. South Korea's foreign ministry calls Japan's release of diplomatic documents related to Tokyo's 1993 acknowledgement of its wartime sexual slavery against standard diplomatic practice. And U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry pledges intense and sustained support for the Iraqi government as Islamic militants continue their violent campaign to take over that country. Primetime News begins now.
Hello, everybody. Good to have you with us tonight. I'm Kang Cheri.
Thanks for tuning in. I'm Sean Lim. Well, Prime Minister nominee Moon Chang-keuk has decided to resign amid criticism over some controversial remarks he made a few years ago.
He said it was a voluntary decision he made to help the president. Choi You-sun reports.
Another one of President Park's prime minister nominees has withdrawn before a confirmation hearing, dealing a heavy blow to the president's running of state affairs.
I came to a conclusion that I would be helping President Park by stepping down at this point in time. Today, I'm resigning as the prime minister nominee.
Tuesday's announcement was widely expected after President Park last week delayed a motion to Parliament for a confirmation hearing on the nominee. Moon Chang-keuk drew heavy criticism from the public and the ruling and opposition parties for comments he made at his church a few years ago. Moon had said Japan's colonization of the Korean peninsula was part of God's plan to awaken the Korean people, and that he also divided the two Koreas to prevent communism from settling in the south. Before announcing his resignation, Moon, however, stood by his previous defense that his comments were distorted after broadcaster KBS only aired portions of them.
Every individual enjoys freedom of religion. That is a precious basic right. What is wrong with what I said according to my religious beliefs before my nomination?
To politicians on both sides of the aisle that demanded he withdraw, Moon said it is the parliament's duty to govern by law and not by public opinion. Following Moon's announcement, President Park expressed regret that the nominee has missed the chance of public judgment at a hearing. President Park's previous nominee An Dae-hee stepped down last month amid allegations he accepted privileges and high earnings in the private sector after retiring as a Supreme Court justice. Her first prime minister nominee named before she took office, Kim Yong-jun, resigned from allegations of real estate speculation and ethical lapses. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the presidential office on this Tuesday formally asked the National Assembly to hold hearings for 8 cabinet-level designates as well as the intelligence agency chief.
But as our Kim Yong-gil reports, the presidential office would like its pick for finance minister in office sooner rather than later.
President Park Geun-hye approved the request for confirmation hearings for 8 newly nominated cabinet ministers on Tuesday, giving the National Assembly up to 20 days to conclude them. For the presidential office, confirmation can't come soon enough, particularly for Finance Minister nominee Choi You-sun. A leadership vacuum exists in the economic sector, and the government is worried about lost time, as the economy is gripped by fears of a double-dip recession amid slumping domestic demand. Korean consumers are increasingly reluctant to open their wallets, and businesses are shying away from massive investment. Experts say exports could falter if the strengthening of the Korean won continues unabated. The problems underscore the importance of having a finance minister in place, someone who can come up with an extra budget and influence monetary policies. Plans to reform the overall regulatory system, overhaul debt-ridden public enterprises, and boost domestic demand are likely to remain stalled until a new finance minister is installed. the presidential office of 청와대 hopes that person is nominee Choi You-sun, whose close ties with the president stand to help him push through major policies. But his nomination remains in limbo due to differences among government agencies and a lack of cooperation from the National Assembly. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
Korea has criticized Japan's one-sided decision to reveal documents relating to the review of a 1993 acknowledgement over Japan's sexual enslavement of women during World War II.
Seoul says the move goes against standard diplomatic practice, while international anger grows over the Abe administration's efforts to undermine the landmark apology. Yurian reports.
Seoul says Tokyo's re-examination of the 1993 Kono Statement, which is its first official acknowledgement of its use of sexual slavery during World War II, is an incomprehensible act. When Japan announced its review of the statement, it also disclosed related documents. Foreign Ministry spokesperson No Kang-il expressed strong disapproval of the act, saying that Japan's unilateral decision to disclose such documents is against standard diplomatic practice. He added that Japan's coercion of women into sexual slavery has already been verified through investigations by the international society as well as UN reports, and thus our re-examination on the issue goes against common sense. The move by Japan has also raised eyebrows outside of Korea. A New York Times editorial titled "Japan's Historical Blinders" said Japanese nationalists will now use the results of the re-examination to retract its previous apology. It added the country cannot be seen as trying to rewrite its past and that the current actions were interfering with its efforts to play a leading role in the region. And that certainly seems to be the case. China, like Korea, also lashed out against Japan's latest move.
Japan's alleged investigation exposes its true intentions of refusing to face up to history. It's even attempting to whitewash or deny the true intentions of its crimes of invasion.
Historians say up to 200,000 women, mostly from Korea and China, were forced to serve in military brothels during World War II. Yurian, Arirang News.
And for a further discussion on the South Korea-Japan relations, we have Professor Koo Young-mo joining us right here in the studio. Thanks so much for coming in today for this.
Glad to be here.
So how much damage do you think Japan's review of this statement will do to the bilateral relations?
As we know, for the 1.5 year, just the President Park Geun-hye didn't have any summit meeting with the Prime Minister Abe because of historical issues such as conflict of women and history textbook and even territorial disputes. So I think the Abe administration's trial to review Kono statement can hurt Korea-Japan relations further. Just I do not see any kind of exit for this kind of issue.
So in terms of trilateral relations between Korea, Japan, and the U.S., what's Washington's reaction to this latest move by Tokyo?
I think the American policymakers will be very concerned over these issues. But I think the first goal or first important things the American government concerns is to maintain the security cooperation between the U.S. and Japan in order to contain the rapidly rising China.
So Seoul officially lodged a complaint with Japan's ambassador to Korea, but on a diplomatic front, what other responses should we have to this move to review the acknowledgement of wartime sexual slavery, or to basically backtrack on it, and to also release some of these priorly undisclosed private communications between diplomats from both countries?
I think it's really personally disappointing that when I look at the Abe administration's actions about these issues. So I think it's almost like diplomatic betrayal.
Exactly. So looking forward, what do you think could be a breakthrough for these two countries? Is it going to be a potential U.S. involvement, which you sort of ruled out earlier, or is it going to be some kind of diplomatic schedules ahead of us, like the APEC summit in November? What is it going to be?
It would be great for the U.S. government to get involved in these issues,
Sure.
Compared to the past reactions of the U.S. government. But that might be like a remote the possibility at this point. So just rather than emphasizing the government role, that I really put emphasis on the role of citizen groups and civil societies. As we know, a lot of Korean local governments has sister relationship with the Japanese local government. And then a lot of civil organizations have networks with the Japanese civil organizations as well.
So the people should stop relying on the politicians and just put the power in their own hands to solve the problem?
These might be long-term solutions. But I think it's really important to try to narrow down the big gap of historical perceptions among Japanese and Korean people.
Does that mean you're pessimistic when it comes to government-level efforts between the two countries?
To some extent, I am pessimistic because for the last 20 years, I waited for the moment when the Korean and Japanese government and political leaders try to have open-minded dialogues to address this issue.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insight with us.
Thank you.
Curry's comments came in response to
Your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Chae-ri from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
High-level government officials from South and North Korea are set to meet this Thursday to discuss matters related to the management of the joint Kaesong Industrial Complex. Korea's Unification Ministry said Tuesday that North Korea had agreed to a proposal to restart the talks. It'll be the first time the Joint Committee in charge of running the park meets since December of last year, when inter-Korean relations soured amid joint South Korea-U.S. military drills. A number of issues will be up for discussion, including the installment of internet services and an electronic access control system. Korea has been operating a provincial reconstruction team in the war-scarred country of Afghanistan for roughly 4 years, but on Monday, its mission came to a close. The group has educated and provided medical assistance to thousands of Afghan citizens. Hwang Sung-hee files this report from Afghanistan.
Ramat Bibi says she was devastated when doctors in Afghanistan said her heart disease could not be cured. She received surgery at the Korean hospital in Bagram Airfield 1 month ago and is now waiting to return home.
I received medical treatment for 1 year, but I didn't get better. I'm so happy to have recovered here and I can't wait to see my family.
Every day, around 250 Afghans like Ramat visit the Korean hospital in Bagram Airfield. The hospital, one of the Korean Provincial Reconstruction Team's reconstruction projects for Afghanistan, has treated some 150,000 Afghans over the last 4 years. The Vocational Training Center is another key project of the Korean PRT that has helped change the lives of people like Faisal Safi, a student turned teacher at the center's electricity department.
My life has completely changed since 4 or 5 years that I've been here. Because I'm an electrician, I can get a job very easily to support my family.
The Korean PRT, consisting of the government, the military, and the private sector, completed its mission in Afghanistan on Monday local time. Since 2010, it has dispatched a total of 2,500 personnel to share Korea's development experience in the fields of health, education, rural development, and governance.
We are the only aid recipient country to have turned into a donor country. This was clearly demonstrated in Afghanistan. Our activity has given hope to Afghans and became a source of pride for Koreans.
And while the PRT era has come to an end, Korea's mission to secure lasting stability in Afghanistan does not end here.
The Korean hospital in Bagram Airfield and the vocational training center will remain open to assist those in need as Afghanistan continues its reconstruction efforts. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News, Bagram.
How do Koreans feel about the rise of China as an economic and military power in the region? A new poll suggests many feel threatened, although perceptions about the origin of the threat appear to be shifting. In a survey of 1,000 people conducted by the Asan Institute for Policy Studies, more than 66% of respondents said they felt threatened by China's military expansion. And while the number might be considered high, it does represent quite a drop from just 2 years ago. On the contrary, the number of people who said they felt threatened by China's economic power has jumped by nearly 20 percentage points since 2012. And speaking of China, Chinese investors are now the largest foreign net buyers of Korean stocks. They've bought some $1.4 billion worth of Korean equities over the past 6 months since December of last year, according to Hana Taechu Securities. Ample liquidity and eased offshore investment regulations in China are the main reasons for this surge. And Hana Taechu forecast more Chinese money to continue flowing into Korea as the mainland market remains stagnant due to strict financial regulations. While the Korean government is trying to take measures to tackle the country's low birth rate, new stats from the month of May showing the population of children in the country at a new low suggest the measures may not be working effectively. Connie Kim tells us more.
The number of children born in Korea has dropped to a 42-year low. The public administration said Tuesday that there were 7.4 million children in the nation last month, the lowest level recorded since 1972. The ministry warned that if this trend continues, the total population will begin to dip in about 15 years as children today mature to marriage age. The total population is forecast to peak at 52.2 million in 2030 and then begin to decline. It's something that would no doubt have an effect on the Korean economy.
For instance, schools will be forced to undergo personal restructuring, and there will be a shortage in national defense resources as fewer people will be enlisted. It will also lead to fewer people in the labor market and an aging of the labor force. Overall, domestic demand will be unstable.
Senior citizens aged 65 and over now make up about 12% of the total population, but the number will rise considerably over the coming years. And while the total number of children currently exceeds that of senior citizens in the nation, that will change by the year 2017. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has pledged intense and sustained support for the Iraqi government as Islamic militants continue their violent campaign to take over the country.
With more on this story, we now turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, Kerry has been meeting with leaders from both the Shia and Sunni sides. Has anything tangible come out of these talks?
Well, after landing in Baghdad on Monday, Kerry reassured that Washington would help Iraqi security forces to combat the Sunni rebels, but stopped short of acceding to the government's request for U.S. airstrikes. Instead, the state secretary has been pressing Iraq's leaders to reach a political resolution by putting aside their sectarian differences to counter the insurgency. Kerry's visit comes as the militant group known as ISIL has gained control over vast territories in northern and western Iraq, including the nation's main oil refinery. In a closed-door meeting with the country's Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, Kerry stressed that the country's very existence was under threat. In the meantime, Washington appears to be resting its hopes on a peace deal between Iraq's Shiite-dominant government and Sunni rebels. Although with ISIL now in control of large parts of Iraq, such a deal appears to be far off. And taking another look at Japan, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has announced a range of reform measures in an attempt to revive the Japanese economy after 2 decades of sluggish growth. Dubbed the third arrow, the 230-point plan focuses on potential regulatory changes to encourage Japanese corporations to invest more and create more jobs. In turn, Abe hopes to regain the confidence of domestic and foreign investors so that Tokyo can help companies out of the red and compete alongside global rivals. To get there, the government plans to slash the country's corporate tax rate below 30% from the current 35% starting next year. Since taking office in 2012, Abe has launched his so-called first two arrows aimed at monetary stimulus policies and boosting public works spending. And finally, turning now to Egypt, where 3 Al Jazeera journalists on trial for allegedly aiding the Muslim Brotherhood have been given jail terms of several years, sparking international outrage. On Monday, Egyptian court convicted the trio of spreading false news and aiding a terrorist organization. Australian Peter Grice and Canadian-Egyptian bureau chief Mohammed Fahmy were given 7 years, while Egyptian producer Bahar Mohammed faces 10 years in prison. All 3 have denied the charges and are expected to appeal the case. The managing director of Al Jazeera, Al Anstey, condemned the ruling as unjust and said the network would continue to fight for their release. Meanwhile, Australia has summoned a senior Egyptian diplomat on Tuesday to protest the sentencing of the Australian reporter. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. Nearly 2 weeks into the World Cup, we've reached the final group matches. There were several deciding fixtures, and the first up was the Netherlands taking on Chile. Now, the Group B rivals already advanced after winning their first 2 matches, but this one was for positioning for the knockout phase. Scores were dead even after a scruffy first half, but the Flying Dutchman found an answer in Leroy Fer's header at the 77th minute. Memphis Depay added 1 in stoppage time, giving the Netherlands a 2-0 victory and the top seed. At the same time, Australia and Spain went head-to-head, but with both headed home, this one was for pride. And David Villa, in his last World Cup, scored the opener for La Roja in the first half. Fernando Torres and Juan Mata also found net in the last third of regulation to give Spain the 3-0 win over Australia, avoiding an embarrassing end to their World Cup run. Meanwhile, Group A wrapped up in the later matches, and it was host Brazil going up against a winless Cameroon. Neymar struck twice for the home team, the second of which came in the 34th minute to put Brazil up for good, leaving little doubt. The hosts added 2 more in the second half for the dominating 4-1 win over Cameroon. And in the other matchup, it was a do-or-die face-off between Croatia and Mexico, with Croatia in a must-win situation. Now, they were deadlocked late into the second half when Mexico exploded for 3 goals, all started by Rafael Marquez's header in the 72nd minute. They won 3-1 over Croatia. And out of Group A comes Brazil with the top seed, followed by Mexico, which means Brazil takes on Chile and Mexico meets the Netherlands in the round of 16. And World Cup action continues on with the teams from both Groups C and D meeting on the pitch. Now, starting with the earlier matches of Group D, the big match here is Italy and Uruguay fighting to advance from the group of death. Meanwhile, Costa Rica meets England in the throwaway match. Now over to Group C. It has Colombia going up against Japan and Cote d'Ivoire taking on Greece. Colombia is the lock here, with Cote d'Ivoire having the best chance to advance out of the remaining countries. And that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Chan. Check back later for more from the world of sports.
It was a relatively nice and sunny day here in the capital, but some regions are still getting showers.
And for more, our Kim Bo-kyung joins us from the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, if I'm correct, we are not going to need our umbrellas tomorrow, though.
Yes, that's because clear and sunny skies are in the forecast nationwide. Now, starting off with World Cup weather, rain along with stormy conditions are in store for Sao Paulo, as you can see, but unfortunately, that may continue through Friday. Returning to Korea, here is an overview of how the summer season is shaping up. We'll frequently see drizzly and cloudy skies in July, and typical hot summer weather is in store for August. And luckily, we won't be getting as many showers and days with high temperatures this September. Overall, this summer won't be as grilling as last year. At the moment, most regions are seeing cloudy skies, and those clouds should move out, and tomorrow looks to be a bright and hot summer day. But before we get there, more showers could fall along the eastern coast. On to Wednesday's readings. Seoul and Daegu reach 30 and 31, while Busan makes it to 25. On to other places. Jeju remains relatively cool at 24. Dokdo peaks at 21. That's all I have for you this hour, but I'll be back with more after midnight.
All right, thanks, Bo-kyung, and that wraps up this edition of Primetime News. Thanks for watching.
Good night to those of you in Asia, at least, and we'll see you back here at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.